JOX 94.5, Damian Mitchell alongside Conrad Van Order. Here on a very, another chilly Tuesday start. The thing is about this weather, it felt like 2 weeks ago, it was about, we were almost touching 80 at one point. And now when you wake up, it's 30 degrees. Welcome to the state of Alabama. Listen, all the heat that we got from Saturday in Coleman Coliseum, I guess it just didn't blow over this week as we start off is another like Arctic blast, so to speak, because I think the rest of this week is still gonna be pretty cold. Some weather, some not say severe, but some winter weather coming in tonight into tomorrow morning. So just be alert these next couple days with the weather and how cold it's going to be. Let your faucets drip just a little bit. Don't want to have anything busted over, but just stay weather aware. But last night it was interesting because I'm not going to sit here and say I'm a big hockey guy. It's not really my thing. But it was unique because the past couple days we've been seeing the Four Nations, I guess you'd say, tournament with Finland, Canada, Sweden, and of course the U.S. And last night I found myself watching a little bit of the Sweden U.S. game, and again, like I'm scratching the surface as a hockey guy. Like I'm just watching it for the action. Somebody gets checked into the wall. Seems pretty interesting. The pace is a lot faster. I've been to a hockey game. I've been to a couple Bulls games, but I've never been to the NHL level. So even when I was at the Bulls game, it was like, oh, like this is pretty, like it's pretty jumping when you get out there and you watch these guys go up and down, the physicality of it. But last night I found myself like, okay, like if this thing keeps going and gets some momentum, like this thing could be pretty nice. Of course, the U.S. They ended up falling last night to Sweden, but I do think that for the interest of, since we don't have any football, we're 39 days away from kickoff for the Birmingham Stallions here and in the UFL. But if you're looking for some action, especially after NBA All-Star Weekend was this weekend, and I barely watched any of it. I remember growing up that, oh man, it was must-see TV. A slam dunk contest, three-point shootout, even the game because it was competitive. But as I've gotten older, it feels like it's gotten a little lackadaisical as far as the efforts for the All-Stars. Well, last night was pretty cool. Like that was the first time, because I didn't really watch too much of it over the weekend. But last night kind of just piquing my head and piquing my interest into what was going on between Sweden and U.S. Yeah, we lost, but overall, I think the action was okay.
Yeah, and I mean, and last night, that game didn't matter, essentially, because the United States had already clinched their spot in the final on Thursday in Boston, and we knew based on what happened earlier in the day that they were going to get a rematch with Canada, and so you had the U.S., they had 3 or 4 guys that sat out the game, essentially just don't want to take any injury risks before Thursday, but no, I mean, it's been cool to see all of the excitement and, people really latch on to this. And, obviously a lot of that came from, the fights and all of the stuff that went into the game over the weekend where, you felt like the Canadians had, disrespected you a little bit if you were an American. And so to get that kind of a rivalry and to get people excited about it, because I'll be completely honest, going into, before it was, United States versus Canada and kind of a little bit of a lead up to the match. Like, I'll be honest, I didn't know this was going on. Like, I don't think a lot of people knew this was going on. And then, you start kind of stirring up some things between Canada and the United States. And then we see what happened on Saturday night. And, I guess the people that were like, oh, I'll check it out. I'll see what's going on. And then you get 3 fights in the first 10 seconds. And you're like, okay, yeah, I might keep watching this. So no, but it was cool to see. And again, last night, people still getting excited, even though ultimately it didn't matter. It was just a match that had to be played. But I think Thursday is going to be pretty exciting. I think you're going to have a lot of people that are very, very excited for that one. Obviously, on Saturday, they played in Montreal. Now they get to come here and they will play in Boston. I'm sure the Boston fan base and that just region of fans will be nothing but polite.
Yeah, I can see that it'll be extremely patriotic in Boston for the U.S. I think the support for the U.S. is going to be they picked the right city. I'll put it like that. It could have been Philadelphia.
That would have been good.
Fresh after a Super Bowl, if they would have put it in Philly, I could only imagine some of the things that I can only imagine some of the things that would happen up there in Philadelphia. But Boston, I mean,
I don't think Boston's going to be any better for them.
Exactly. But you want to talk about the pride in America, I think it'll be interesting to see. Again, like I barely know any of the rules of hockey. All I know is as long as the puck goes in the goal, that's all that matters. But other than that, as far as physicality, I mean, you get checked out there. And I was finding kind of just like the comfort of, okay, I just want a fight to happen. I was just kind of on the edge of my seat of just swing. Like, I just want to see it happen. And also think about it from this perspective. Hockey is the only sport besides like the actual hand-to-hand combat sports where fighting is allowed. Like, you'll go to the penalty box, but I mean, they let you duke it out. As soon as you hit the ice, all right, that's it. Like, go to the penalty box and we'll see it. Just imagine if that happened in other sports. Imagine if baseball, well, I mean, we've seen some fights in baseball. I mean, we've seen Francisco Lindor. We were familiar with his game.
Yeah, I was about to say in baseball,
you
could get away with it because they, kind of take their helmet off a lot of the time anyways when they're going at it. But I mean, that in basketball, I mean, football, I mean, we see people go for it, but whether it's, Myles Garrett trying to hit somebody with his helmet or, players, I've just never understood, and I understand getting mad, but like punching somebody in the helmet, like
some of the dumbest things you
dog,
can do.
that's going to hurt you way more than it's going to hurt them. I don't think you're, that's really helping anything there, but it could spice some things up, maybe in soccer.
Yeah, for as much flopping as and excitement, well, I say flopping. But
see, I don't think soccer fights would be that good because they, they're so dramatic out there on the court
right.
that maybe, I don't know how good it would be.
And I mean, I'll probably look at it from kind of like the boxer perspective. Like, if you kick somebody like anywhere above the leg, like that can cause like very severe damage as hard as they kick the ball, like on a constant level.
Mm-hmm.
You mess around and, sweet chin music somebody, like that's a career, that's a life. You might have to register your legs as lethal weapons if you have to use them outside of just, what you're doing at your job. But I found myself watching it a little bit last night. It was entertaining because, I mean, I was flipping around. It's kind of in that dead man's period. I watched a little bit of Duke and Virginia, but I mean, Duke beat the brakes off of them, and you kind of just, okay, well, this is kind of what we expected. But in college basketball, we did have the AP poll released, with Auburn still being number 1. Florida jumps up to number 2, Duke at number 3, and Alabama only falls to 4. So I think when you look at just the top level of the SEC and what the SEC has brought into college basketball this season, it's very obvious, at least to me, that Auburn is the best team in college basketball. We kind of talked a little bit yesterday after their win against Alabama. It's, okay, after what we've seen from Auburn, it would be a major disappointment if you're not in the Elite Eight, Final Four, National Championship bubble, because I do think that this is probably the most complete team that you've had where, I mean, we've seen the past couple of years when we've seen, the Jabari Smiths, we've seen the Walker Kesslers of the world there at Auburn, and it felt as though, okay, they have some of the best players, but it didn't feel as though they're not as cohesive as this unit is, with Janai Broome being at what he is as a college basketball player and everybody else kind of figuring out their role. And now they're maximizing it at the point of the season where, okay, if you're Bruce Pearl, you're probably licking your chops a little bit of, okay, if I can get these guys to play like this game in and game out, it's going to be hard to stop us. And I think we got that on display Saturday. Now we still have the midweek games and things. And you look at the rest of the schedule for Auburn, it's not going to be easy. You're going to get everybody's best shot because you're the best. And I think from this point forward, you just don't want to have that letdown game of, all right, now that we've seen it, how about we replicate that? I know it's hard to replicate that game in and game out, but now that becomes the expectation. So as we get close into this March Madness run, this March Madness pursuit, Auburn is starting to ascend even when they were already good coming in. So I think this is kind of that point of, all right, if you're an Auburn fan, you got to be feeling confident about your squad, and you just want to avoid another letdown like you had last year early in the NCAA tournament, because this team has high expectations.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think the expectations have continued to get higher because, I mean, I think at this point, I think you have to be looking at Final Four or bust, and I know that kind of sets you up for disappointment just because of how difficult it is to get to a Final Four. I mean, heck, I think we would agree that, Bruce Pearl has had some better Auburn teams in the past 5 or 6 years than maybe the 2018-19 team. but that's the only team that's made it to a Final Four, right? Like Alabama and Nate Oates have certainly had better teams than last year, but that was the team that got to a Final Four. And so it's just kind of, it's so unpredictable at times, and it really is about when you are playing your best basketball. And Alabama and certainly Auburn, and I think Alabama too, to a certain degree, have now put themselves in a situation where, I almost feel bad because it really does feel like, if either team doesn't make it to a Final Four, it's going to be a big disappointment. And I certainly think in Auburn's case, because, we talked about this a little bit yesterday on 3-Man Front, but Auburn this year feels like UConn last year, where going into the postseason, and I know we still got, 6 games left in SEC play, but going in to the postseason and looking ahead to that, it just feels like Auburn is that team that no matter, really regardless of who they match up with, what region they're in, any of that kind of stuff, you just look at them and go, okay, yeah, they would be favored in my mind, or I would pick them to beat literally any team in the country on a neutral site. And that's a credit to how good that Auburn team is. But that also puts a tremendous amount of pressure on you, right? And especially when, let's be honest, like 6 years, I mean, that's kind of a long time to have, essentially reached your peak, and now you're trying to get back up there. And, we've seen, for both Alabama and Auburn, we've seen them be a number 1 seed before. And, it was disappointing for both of them. Both of them had, fairly short tournament runs compared to what the expectations are when you're a number 1 seed. And so now you enter, you're in a season where, this is one of the best seasons in, regular seasons that I can remember any team having in college basketball in my lifetime. But none of that matters if, you get kicked in the Sweet 16 of the NCAA tournament, right?
Yep.
Nobody's going to look back and go, oh, yeah, remember how great that 2024-2025 season was when, you made it to the round of 32 or the round of 16. And, I think even at this point with the win over Alabama and just the way that they're looking, like I think even an Elite 8 to some people would be disappointing. And I don't know if that's fair or not, but I think that's just what the expectation is. And, Auburn having separated themselves from the rest of the country right now, I think it's just, you're in a spot, you got to go and make something happen. And you never know when you're going to have a team like this and have another season like this. So there's certainly a lot of pressure on Bruce Pearl and Auburn. And, I think the same thing goes for Alabama. I think maybe there you have a little bit of leeway just because you went to the Final Four last year as opposed to 6 years ago. But, people are ready to get back and have that experience again. And I think Auburn's, certainly poised to do that. If I were to have to pick any team and put money on them to win a national championship right now, it would be Auburn. But things can change in the postseason, and it's great, having all these great wins and top 10 wins and things in the regular season. But as we know, you can get into the tournament, and the 57th best team in the country has a hot night shooting from 3, and some white boy you never heard of goes off for 28 points, and next thing you know, you're on a flight back home. So, you got to be careful with how that stuff goes. But, it's cool that we have those types of expectations for both Auburn and Alabama now at this point. But I do also worry. It's like, man, I just wonder if we really understand how difficult it is to make it to a Final Four.
Yep.
I mean, trying to get through an NCAA tournament is, I would argue it's the most difficult postseason format you have in college athletics, just because of there's so many variables at play, and just the randomness of it all, essentially. So, I mean, it's going to be. I can't wait for March. I think the SEC tournament's going to be great, obviously, and then March Madness is going to be awesome too. It's just these expectations, they keep creeping up and creeping up. And then, I would say inversely, I feel like we heard a lot of people, and I'm sure y'all did on Mac and Cube, of a lot of Alabama fans that, are, maybe a little down in the dumps. And I get it. You didn't want to lose the game. But, I mean, again, this was just, if you can remember last year for Alabama and how bad the end of the regular season was, where there was legitimately a question at times of like, man, do they even deserve to go to the tournament? Like, I know they're going to get in, but they were playing bad basketball the last few weeks of the end of last season. They got bounced their first game in the SEC tournament to Florida, and we saw what happened.
Yep.
So, one loss to Auburn, while, maybe it stings for you, it's, there's a lot of season left to go, and Alabama is certainly still going to be viewed as one of the favorites to make it to a Final Four. Just little less than Auburn. Auburn, they look like a buzzsaw.
Yeah, and they both hit the court at the same time tomorrow. The old SEC double up with Arkansas taking a trip to Neville Arena to take on the Auburn Tigers at 8 p.m. on ESPN, and Alabama hitting the road to Columbia, Missouri to take on the Missouri Tigers at 8 p.m. on the SEC Network. See if Alabama can get over those woes against another version of the Tigers in the Missouri Tigers from the weekend over Auburn. And then Auburn, can they stop the, I would say, ascending Arkansas Razorbacks, even though they did lose to Texas A&M over the weekend? They don't look as bad as what they started in SEC play. Now they kind of seem as though, I'll put it like this: Auburn don't play. If you don't play your A game, this game could be it could be very uncomfortable for you, because Coach Cal, no matter how you slice it up, the man can coach. No matter how you feel about him personally, the man can get it done, because he's doing it at Arkansas right now, and they're trying to stay alive as far as their NCAA tournament bid is concerned. 205-834-9450. Your text message, your calls, always welcome here on Morning JOX. When we return here, let's take a look at the college football playoff. Is a potential expansion. The SEC and Big Ten are meeting down in New Orleans, Louisiana. And where do we go from here? We'll get your reaction on the other side. Keep it locked right here on Morning JOX and JOX 94.5. 6:21 here on Morning JOX. JOX 94.5. Damian Mitchell, Conrad Van Order, and you as well, our wonderful listeners, 205-834-9450. Big John, he texts in, as you can as well, every single day here on Morning JOX. He says, love me some Auburn Tigers basketball, but let's talk college football for a moment. We will. But he asks, will Auburn's Jackson Arnold have competition at quarterback? And he also asked for the leading candidates for Bama's quarterback. I think that from what they spent in the transfer portal, I think you can quote unquote say it's a competition, but it's Jackson Arnold's competition to lose. I think if you getting him from Oklahoma, you're expecting him to be the starter because, I mean, no disrespect to Ashton Daniels, but I think he was more of just quarterback depth in case something happens. Transferred from Stanford. And Deuce Knight, he's still a freshman. I don't think that, he may have the talent, he may have the biggest upside, but he also hasn't seen SEC defenders just yet. So I wouldn't want to throw him out there into the wolves. But he could come in spring practice and, ball out. But I think all roads are leading that Jackson Arnold is coming to be the Auburn starting quarterback.
Yeah, I would. Technically, there will be a quarterback competition for both. I mean, I guess everyone technically has a quarterback competition in spring and fall practice. But, yeah, I would say Jackson Arnold. I mean, I would think like 90, maybe even a little higher than 90% chance that he's the starting quarterback. Yeah. I mean, I would say, obviously, barring injury, which hopefully doesn't happen, he's going to be your starting quarterback this year, at least week 1 of the season. And then I think for Alabama, it's easy to just put Ty Simpson there. I think I don't think he has a 90% chance maybe like Jackson Arnold does. I think it's certainly his battle to lose. And I think right now, if the season started today, yes, I think he would be your quarterback. But I think that Austin Mack will have a fair opportunity. And keep in mind, he's the only guy that I guess has worked with Ryan Grubb and has that experience because they were together there that 1 year in Washington. Not saying that means he's going to win the job, but maybe that helps a little bit. But I think Keelan Russell, the freshman, I think he's going to have every opportunity to win the job. Honestly, I mean that's Kalen DeBoer's guy. That's somebody that they identified and they've recruited heavily and did a good job of hanging on to. And he was the number 2 quarterback in this last cycle. And I think that if they think he's ready with how much talent he has and how much potential he has, they're not going to be afraid to throw him out there. But I mean, smart money would still be on Ty Simpson, at least to start the season. But I think Jackson Arnold is essentially locked in as the starter, whereas I think Ty Simpson, maybe there's a little more wiggle room for competition.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%, even on the Alabama side as well. I think that, for as much excitement as we've gotten from Keelan Russell, as far as just his hype coming in as a freshman, I think he'll have an opportunity to go out and see if he can compete right away. And I think that it makes the entire room better because if you're Ty Simpson, you've been there for the longest, but also you've experienced the coaching change. You stuck with it for a year, and now it feels as though it's your opportunity. It's almost like a passing of the baton, but you also have to go out there and earn it. In the same way with Austin Mack, as somebody that's played for Kalen DeBoer and Ryan Grubb, he's familiar with their system. So I think that's more of a competition than it is on the Auburn side of things, because I do think that Jackson Arnold, you didn't go get him out the transfer portal to say, hey, you may have a chance of being a starting quarterback. It's all right. You saw what happened with Peyton Thorne. Don't be Peyton Thorne. That's all we pretty much would need you to be. Like, don't be Peyton Thorne, and we'll see where it goes. But continuing on the college football front, the Big Ten and the SEC officials are meeting down in New Orleans, Louisiana, potentially coming up with some ideas as far as the college football playoff expansion is concerned. And I think that the 12-team playoff was a good idea. I do think it was a good idea. I just think that once we started unveiling the rankings, there wasn't any kind of clarity of what the committee was truly looking towards or looking for. And I think now the SEC and the Big Ten, because they have the heavyweights in their conferences, they're saying, all right, if you're going to do automatic qualifiers, these are the criteria that needs to go into it. And we should have the pick of the litter of the automatic qualifying spots. And I think the model that they're looking for is pretty much 4 automatic qualifiers for both the SEC and the Big Ten. And then the ACC potentially has 2, Big 12 has 2, Group of 5 has one, and then
Notre Dame,
Notre Dame.
essentially. Yeah.
And to me, while I get it, but now it truly diminishes a conference championship. Like you're pretty much you're solidifying one spot, but also you're kind of not even gonna say watering down the product, but it does say that, okay, if you're Ole Miss, for example, now you're still being rewarded for your losses against the Kentuckys of the world, the Floridas of the world, where you are the better team, but you lost to them. So that kind of puts you in no man's land. You lost to LSU as well. So now you're in that bubble, but you're kind of like, oh, okay, well, we can afford a couple losses and still find ourselves in the playoffs. But now it's, okay, well, who really cares? We could probably rest our starters, a couple weeks or not make them play as much because we know that we're going into the playoff. But then if you're in the conference championship game, it's like, okay, well, we're playing in the conference championship game. Does it really matter if we already have a playoff spot locked in? But it kind of diminishes what is a conference champion. And I think conference championships still deserve the praise that they honor because you've done your business in the regular season.
Yeah. Well, okay. So my understanding is, or at least this is a proposed idea for how this would be handled, is essentially if you got rid of a conference championship game, what you would do on that weekend is you would have essentially a play-in for that conference. And so my understanding of it is you would have, for example, the top 6 teams from the SEC. All right, the top 2 teams who would have played in the SEC championship, you get a bye, you go to the playoff.
Mm-hmm.
Then that weekend you would have the 3rd best team and the 6th best team play, and the 4th best team and the 5th best team play. And the winner of those 2 games would then get the 3rd and 4th guaranteed bids.
Spot.
So instead of a conference championship game, you would essentially get 2 play-in games from the SEC in exchange for that. And, I understand, I know having conference championship games, it means a lot to some people. Personally, if that's the way they want to go and you just put the play-in games on the higher seeded team's campus and you get another home game essentially, I would be perfectly fine with that. And while I do, I enjoy conference championship weekend, I think the play-in structure, it makes things a little more exciting. I mean, think about this year, right, where you had, your teams that got in, you had, your Georgias, your Texases, and Tennessee. But then what was the debate about? It was about Alabama, Ole Miss, and South Carolina. That would have been your 6 teams this year, right? Like you would have had Texas and Georgia going in the playoff,
mm-hmm.
and then you would have had what? Alabama versus South Carolina, and or Tennessee versus South Carolina, and Alabama versus Ole Miss. And sign me up for those matchups, and then whoever wins those games, they're going to the playoff. So, and maybe not every year is going to be like that. And I certainly think this was causing an issue in, I mean, I'll just be honest. I'm not trying to watch the NC State take on Duke or something, in an ACC play-in game, but it is what it is. But I think that structure, it gives you a little more football and it adds more intrigue for more teams. And so maybe that's how, because I understand the argument of, oh, well, we're just going to keep diminishing the regular season and it's not even going to matter anymore. Teams are just going to try to get to, 9 wins and then rest guys, whatever. But I think, this year was an example of, there's going to be some years where you're going to have 6 teams, maybe even more, that you think are worthy of playoff consideration. And, getting to have these play-in games, you kind of get to settle a lot of those debates that we have on the field. So I think that's an interesting proposal. I will say this. I know that, what you were explaining, the 14-team format with, 4 spots for the SEC and Big Ten, 2 for the ACC and Big 12, and then a group of 5 and then Notre Dame. If you're going to do that, I would say just go to the 16-team model that they proposed and have no buys.
Yep.
And I would be perfectly fine with that. No buys whatsoever. Just the top 16 teams. And essentially how that seems like that would work is you get your top 25 rankings, teams 1 through 16 are in the playoff. And that's it. There's no, you won this conference, so you get a higher seed. Nope. It's just what your ranking is. That's what seed you are. And you're going to go play some games. And it doesn't matter if you're the 16th best team or the number 1 team. You're going to have to play every round in order to win a title. I think that is the way that I would like to see things go.
Me too, and I agree with you too because okay, if you quote unquote have to have automatic qualifiers, ensure that the conference champions are in, but don't guarantee them like a number 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 seed. Just say that hey, you're going to be in, and we'll kind of just reseed and see how it goes 1 through 16. Because to me, I think the committee, what they did last season when Miami had that late loss, they dropped down 5 spots, and it's okay. Well, you're not going to punish other teams that may have had quote unquote a worse loss, like a Tennessee and Arkansas. Like looking back on it now, if you want to play the loss game, it's okay. Tennessee lost to Arkansas, and Arkansas lost to a terrible Oklahoma State team. So how much do losses weigh now? And I think we never really got that clarification from the College Football Playoff Committee last season. But the committee, I don't know. Like the more we expand, the more of where do we find the sweet spot? Remember when we had the 4-team playoff and we were leaving conference champions out, and it's sorry, like you're not one of the 4 best teams. And I think we never really got clarification as far as just how it was going to be structured because some losses outweighed the others, and it's all about when you lost to them or how bad you lost to them. I remember the 14 playoff, it was all about game control and things like that of, okay, yeah, you may have beaten a team 21-17 that you were probably a 30-point favorite over. So if you didn't necessarily have game control, they kind of knocked you forward. And I don't know. Like, I just think the structure of the playoff and the committee, the people that are in there, they have a hard job, but they don't lay out any criteria of what they're looking for game in and game out, week in and week out from whatever team they have in their ranking.
Yeah, and I mean, that's a completely different issue. But it's the fact that we've been doing this for 11 years now, and we've had various committees, and it just doesn't feel like there's continuity. It feels like essentially every year, it's a fresh slate, and then. But then some of the things that they say, and again, right, we're human beings, there's human error, you're going to say things that are contradictory at times, but, then it's odd to hear things like, this year, I know something that stood out to some people was, they brought up at one point of, oh, well, when we were evaluating Alabama, well, defensively, they're always good. And essentially just like, we don't even think about it because it's Alabama defensively, right? And it's like, okay, I mean, yeah,
Did you watch the Oklahoma game?
Exactly, but then it's like, okay, but they're not, nobody's mistaken, Alabama defense the last couple of years for the 2015 Alabama,
right.
Yeah, so it's like, okay, I guess it's nice you're giving the benefit of the doubt, but that doesn't seem right on top of the fact that, yeah, it seems like maybe you're a little outdated on some of these biases that you're given and just things like that where that gets murky. And then obviously, with the whole situation, you have a little bit of an elephant in the room with Notre Dame where,
Yep.
Something's got to happen where, they have to at the very least be forced to play a more difficult schedule because that's going to rub people the wrong way of every single year. I mean, the more you expand, the more teams you get in, the more wiggle room you're giving a school like Notre Dame to essentially say, hey, just, you show up and, at this point you go 9-3 and you're going to be guaranteed a spot in the playoff every single year. And, oh yeah, by the way, if, you go to the playoff and you win a couple of games, you're going to get to take all that money home with you again, just like you did this year. And that was an issue that we heard about. So they got a lot of things to figure out with this. But, at the end of the day, the SEC and the Big Ten have a lot of power because they, essentially the other conferences signed over an agreement last year of, all right, moving forward in 2026, like, we're happy to be a part of this. We appreciate y'all giving us a seat at the table. So y'all just kind of let us know what you want to do. And if we don't like it, we'll let you know, but I guess there's nothing we can really do about it. And so that's the situation you find yourself in. And, Pat brought this up yesterday, but, one of the questions I had was, okay, so are we not going to get any changes for this year?
Right.
In terms of seeding, just, all right, get rid of the conference, championship seeds, just rank the top 4 teams, right? I think that's what a lot of people wanted to see. And it feels like maybe that's not going to happen now because you're going to have the Big 12 and ACC that are upset about this. And so conversely, they're not going to want to come to an agreement to make things better for this upcoming year. So 2026 is when we're looking at.
Just buckle up because it's
kind of like a reality show. There's just
really
a lot
is.
of like drama and pettiness and
everybody's mad at everybody. Then they're working backdoor deals like, okay, well, if y'all get in, can you help us out? Can work around it. Nah, we'll see where it goes. 205-834-9450. We'll get to your text message, your calls, just reacting on potentially college football playoff expansion. What does it look like for the SEC, Big Ten? Do you want to see automatic qualifiers? So much more. We'll get your reaction on the other side. 205-834-9450. Keep it locked right here on Morning JOX and JOX 94.5. .639 here on Morning JOX, JOX 94.5. Damian Mitchell alongside Conrad Van Order. And you as well, our wonderful listeners, 205-834-9450. I kind of just spitballing some ideas, and just with the SEC and the Big Ten meeting down in New Orleans, kind of, having a discussion on college football playoff expansion. What does that work for those two conferences? Because they do have the heavy hitters as far as when it comes to revenue, eyeballs. And I mean, when you look at the most watched games in college football, they mostly deal with the SEC and the Big Ten. So all eyes are usually on them, and just trying to figure out how they can get more teams in and continue to make the playoffs an exciting time as far as crowning a national champion, and deservingly so. And just getting your reaction on these topics. We had some text messages coming in, and also some calls we're going to get to here. 205-834-9450. Somebody texts in and says, a future college football playoff needs to be 14 teams. keep the top 5 conference champions. Top 2 conference champions get a bye. 3 through 14 seeded by rankings. First and second round games on campus of higher seed. Semifinals and championship at neutral site. Kind of like the bowl game.
Okay, yeah. I mean, that could work. I guess when I look at the expansion, I'm like, do we want to go from 12 to 14 just to inevitably then go to 16? And you could make the same argument, I guess, if you just go to 16, then maybe they would just want to immediately go to 18 or 24 or whatever, like you have in FCS. I don't know, but I don't know. 16 seems like a round number. I'm just a fan of the no buys. Like I think that, and I think the teams that got buys this year would probably tell you the same thing, that, oh yeah, maybe that wasn't the the gift that it was portrayed to be. So, that's where a lot of that stuff comes from. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I mean, if we can find a format where you can get 4 SEC teams and 4 Big Ten teams in, I think that's a win, regardless of if you have to go the 14 or 16 team route to get to that, just because then you at least have somewhat of an assurance that the conference isn't going to be, screwed over or whatever. And you could say what you want about this year. And, I know Alabama was the team that would have gotten in if, SMU or Clemson hadn't, whatever. And then you can say what you want about, what they did to Michigan in the bowl game and how that looked, and, oh, they didn't deserve to get in after that. But, I think we can all say that we would have rather have seen Alabama, Ole Miss, or South Carolina in there than some of the other teams that were selected. So, yeah, those assurances would be nice.
Somebody else takes in and says the 16 team playoff makes much more sense. I personally don't like the 14 playoff with Notre Dame getting automatic bid. Seems like special treatment. Yeah, that's the thing about just Notre Dame. They just find they're just in that. Like there shouldn't be a debate if it's a conference champion versus say a 10-2 Notre Dame, because again, especially if it's a 2-loss conference champion that had to play that extra game to get to, say, a 10 or 11 wins, I think that should rank higher than Notre Dame, depending on who they've played the entire season, because their schedule year to year looks completely different.
Well, and it's just one of those things that sets up to be kind of a shady situation if you have, if the agreement is essentially, all right, Notre Dame, we're guaranteeing you a spot in the playoff as long as you finish as one of the top 16 teams. All right, let's say Notre Dame goes 8-4 one year and they're like number 18 going into the final week of the season. Are you going to upset the apple cart and not put them in the playoff? Or are you going to move them up maybe a spot or two to let them in and just kind of keep that? And that's just one of those situations where, and maybe that wouldn't happen, but that would be one of those situations that just seems ripe for controversy. On top of, if you have the 14-team format and the way that it's proposed, you get all your guaranteed spots for all the conferences, and the G5 gets one, and then Notre Dame. And it doesn't leave any wiggle room, right? And I understand most years you probably don't need that, but, let's say, there's a year where you have 5 SEC teams that are just really, really good, or 5 Big Ten teams, or heck, there's a year where, Clemson, SMU, and Florida State all, have really great years in the ACC. And you're like, man, really need, 3 teams would be deserving from that conference this year. I just think you're kind of putting yourself in a more difficult situation with the 14 teams, because you're essentially saying, all right, all the spots are accounted for. It's just, all right, how are we going to fill out the bracket? But, essentially going into the year, if you're Notre Dame, you're guaranteed a spot as long as you don't have a disaster of a season. And then, even teams in the other conferences, I don't know. It's tricky. I will say this. I'm glad that we're not the ones that are being paid to make the official decisions.
I agree with you 100%. Somebody else takes in and says Alabama would have been in the playoff if Nick Saban would have stayed. He wouldn't have lost the players, and he wouldn't have lost the games that DeBoer lost. In the words of Kanye West, I guess we'll never know.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's a fair argument to make. It's just, I mean,
Nick Saban.
I thought we had moved on from that.
Right. What if Alabama doesn't get in next year? You can't say that, well, Nick Saban was there. We don't know. Can't deal. If Nick Saban doesn't deal with hypotheticals, neither can we. Because there's a reason why he left. And maybe he kind of looked at this roster and was like, nah.
Well, it's not like he watched this season and went, oh, man, if I had been there, we would have made the playoffs this year. Then he calls Greg Bird and goes, hey, fire Kalen DeBoer, I'm coming back.
Right.
Like It is what it is. I get it. He's the best coach of all time. I would love if he could have coached for 100 years, right? And that would have been great. But
Yeah, and, you know, we've crossed that
it
bridge.
is what it is. He's not coming back. He's gone. Let's make the
let's
playoff
keep
with
it-
let's make the playoff with the new guy.
Absolutely. Let's go to Rick in Helena. Wants to talk some college football playoffs with us. What's going on, Rick?
Yeah, not much, guys. I just want to say I think the problem with the college football playoff in general is that we still have a committee determining the teams, and the concept of this mega conference is sort of throwing a hamper on how the playoff could have been played with merit. I believe, and this will probably never happen, but the conferences need to be broken into, let's say, 16 separate conferences, and these mini conference championships that would lead from that will be the first round of what could be a 16-team playoff, and then you have 8-4-2 that can be played in the bowl series as your playoff brackets after these championships. That way, everyone gets a conference championship and everyone is eligible to play. I'll take your response off the air. Thank you.
We appreciate you, Rick.
So I guess you're saying you would have 16 conferences, and so you would have, like, I guess, a 32-team playoff, and so the top 2 teams from each conference. I mean, you know, that's one of those things you would just have to see how it's broken up.
Yeah.
Right?
Because I always have to say, like, regular season wise, who would you play?
Well, and what if you have, you know, Alabama, Georgia, Auburn, and Tennessee in the same conference, right? You're telling me only one of those teams can get in the playoff every year? Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State, if they're in the same one, you know.
That's a lot.
Because then, you know, you're in this tricky thing where you have to make it regional. I would imagine that's what it would be based on, is geography.
Mm-hmm.
But then you're kind of putting yourself in a tough spot where, you know, no offense, but, you know, if there's the Boise, Idaho conference, right? And there, you know, and you've got like Boise and Wyoming and Idaho, you know, like these, you know, that's going to be a lot different. And so, but then if you spread it around, it's not going to make sense geographically. So, yeah.
Seems like a lot.
Maybe there is a way that would work out if it's broken down and you could show me, like, all right, these are the conferences, these are the teams in each conference. Because I know that we've seen, you know, mock-ups of that before, and it is intriguing. And I don't hate that idea that he gave. It's just, you know, finding a way to make it balanced where, again, you don't want to have one conference that's stacked with, you know, 5 of the best teams in the country, and you're telling me only one of those can actually get into a tournament. And
like the Florida region, like what would that look like with Florida, Florida State, UCF, USF, Florida Atlantic, Florida International, like Miami? I mean, it seems tough. Seems tough to pull off, but we'll continue on the other side, get some more reaction. 205-834-9450. Your text message, your calls coming up here on Morning JOX and JOX 94.5. 6:53 here on Morning JOX, JOX 94.5. Damian Mitchell, Conrad Van Order here with you for a few more moments as pass you on to McElroy and Kublik in the morning from 7 to 10 a.m. Then Conrad's back live from Social Taco, 3-man front from 10 to 2. And then the Paul Feinbaum Show from 2 to 6 here on JOX 94.5. Talking about conference expansion. College playoff expansion. And we had a caller call in a few minutes ago, Rick from Helena. It's talking about just this mega conference, and Hastings texted in. He said 16 conferences. It's a no from me, dog. I think it's just
be a lot to go from 4 to 16.
Yeah, like I would have to see it. Like I just got to see how that would be structured because that does seem like a lot. And I do like the 16 team playoff idea. To your point, just no buys. Like just you got the 16 and almost run like the NCAA tournament, big dog. Go out there. If you want to be the national champion, go out there and earn it. But also, I think that when you look at, so what was that? Ohio State ended up playing, 17 games in total?
I think so,
17 games in total. So, we talk about, the NCAA talks about player safety. Adding some extra games ain't necessarily, on the safest of routes. But also, I do think that we have to crown a national champion that we believe is the best in college football.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I think this is an appropriate time to bring this up too, right here at the end of the show, so people can't get mad. So if you're upset about this, be ready because it also looks like we're getting NCAA tournament expansion.
Oh boy!
And there are reports coming out that as soon as next year, you could be getting 76 teams in the tournament instead of 68. So you'd have some extra first round matchups there. So if expansion of postseason play is not your cup of tea, then it's just a bad day for you.
Where did the old adage not everybody can get in just start to weigh off? Like, man, if you didn't handle your business in the regular season, man, you just gonna have to be slapped out of luck. We can't get everybody in there. I thought it was cool with 64. But who knows, man? We want to expand everything.
Hey, more games, though, right?
Manifest destiny. So, expand and conquer, baby. That's all we do. Oh, boy. McElroy and Kublik in the morning. Those guys are next.